Hi, I'm Lady Genevieve, and today's video is a spoiler review of episode 7. Before you get into it, make sure you take a moment to make yourself some herbal tea or do a nice hydrating face mask. I want all of you to look after yourselves because this episode was an emotional ride. I know what you're probably wanting me to get into, but let's go through the other character stories and then we can get into all of Emily's material. First things first, the Dickinson parents. Yeah, do I care? No. Did they remove the slur or did they leave it in? Feel free to let me know. Moving on now, let's talk about Sojourner Truth. I love her. I want more of her on the show. If there was ever going to be a spin-off show from Dickinson to focus on secondary characters from the Dickinson universe, I would want her to be in it. She is exploding with energy and charisma, and just overall, she is a joy to watch. It was really bittersweet to see Betty finally getting more screen time because we see how much of a toll it's taking on her to have not heard from Henry and worrying about whether or not he's okay. And then she finds out he is a soldier now, which is something that she didn't know before. She has every right to be worried. And that's one of the things that I really like about Dickinson as a show is that you have characters like Betty or Sojourner who don't get a lot of screen time, but I still really get invested in them and what they're doing. One other thing I wanted to point out about Betty's material is the line that she says of, "I love the US postal system." What a perfect excuse to remind people that the US postal system has been under attack by politicians, greedy businessmen, and that it needs to not be meddled with or privatized in any way, shape, or form. Truly, I am exhausted that I can hardly get through 5 minutes of this show without bumping into yet another catastrophe caused by greedy capitalists. I hate it here. Before we get into Henry's story, I want to take a moment to share the list of do not reveal spoilers that were not supposed to be revealed by press before this episode aired. The first one is Emily and Lavinia time traveling to the future via gazebo, and that time traveling is the specific way that we come to meet Sylvia Plath. The second is news of Fraser Stern's death reaching Emily. The third is Austin paying someone to go to war in his place. And then in parentheses on the list, it says draft dodging, since that's the name of what that practice is. And then the fourth and final do not reveal was Henry and the other members of the Beaufort, South Carolina Regiment of Black Soldiers, parentheses, the 1st South Carolina Volunteers, deciding to arm themselves and ambush a group of Confederates. Before we talk about that very compelling development in Henry's story, I want to first address the fact that it is irritating, to say the least, to be given a list of do not reveal spoilers only for the trailer to finally be released, and you can fully see Emily and Lavinia running with a car visible in the background. Dickinson stans are obviously going to go through the trailer frame by frame because that's how internet fandom works, and they're going to find the car and figure out that you're doing some sort of time traveling story. You could have shown Lavinia and Emily together looking panicked or stressed out in this episode without giving away that they are in the future. Anyway, getting back on track now, I was so incredibly moved by Henry's story and his actions in this episode. That performance was superb when he had tears in his eyes, but he didn't let any of them fall. Yes, send him a bouquet of flowers, or I guess maybe the more environmentally friendly version of that would be to plant a tree in his honor. Yeah, let's do that. Get more reforestation programs going. The world desperately needs it. Please hurry up. I was really happy when Henry got to that point of hitting his limit with the bureaucratic nonsense because I knew that it meant that we were going to now reach this part of his story where he goes to Higginson and stands up for his students, for his comrades. It's such an important distinction to make that even though Higginson is understandably stressed out because of the bureaucratic process and the meddling impeding his ability to do what's best for these soldiers, It's entirely different for Henry because he's the one that has to live that experience. Higginson is talking about how he just wants to be able to go back to the way things were when he's working for The Atlantic and advising poets. There is no just going back for Henry or any of his students. They have to fight to push things forward the way they desperately need to be pushed forward. It's a really fitting allegory for the complacency that a lot of people have towards the political system, especially in the US. A lot of Hollywood celebrities only post about politicians and the political process with calls to action about once every 4 years. You would not believe how many celebrities have been entirely embarrassing by leaving up these Instagram posts from a few months ago, actually it's about a year ago now, endorsing and celebrating the election of Biden, but then they do nothing to keep up with his horrific complacency to a deeply harmful political system now that he is in office. They don't call him out for doing giant weapons deals with Sebastián Piñera's government. They don't call out the fact that he's still refusing to declassify those JFK documents. They don't call out his lie about promising to cancel student loans, but in actuality, he told his corporate donors that nothing would fundamentally change. So clearly, he only lied to the 99%. They don't call out Kamala for telling Guatemalan refugees and immigrants, don't come, with zero acknowledgement of how much the US government has meddled with Latin American countries. Go look up Operation Condor or Operation Northwoods or Operation Urgent Fury. Hold on, I'm almost done with my tangent, but I'm not quite done yet. Those celebrities also don't call out Kamala for going to Vietnam and saying she wants Vietnam to know that America is back. Excuse me? This refusal to engage with historical and current political ongoings is constant for people in positions of privilege. And when I say that, I am not just making it about this particular scene in Dickinson between Higginson, who is a white man, and Henry, who is a black man. Everyone living in the global north needs to stay on top of all of this, or else nothing will fundamentally change. That is what this scene and this exchange between these two characters is emblematic of. If Henry did not push back against the machine, against the system, against the status quo, nothing would happen. Nothing would get done. Those soldiers would still be there at an incredibly dangerous disadvantage, and they would not have stood a chance of surviving the impending conflict. That is the reality. Why do you think Rage Against the Machine is called Rage Against the Machine? There you go. Higginson was a good ally for the first time in a way that was actually meaningful. I have never liked Higginson more in these first 7 episodes than when he disobeyed the status quo. And speaking of Higginson, did you notice those lines in the episode's opening where both Emily and Higginson refer to each other as friend? Yeah, because they're friends, Sue, as in platonic. Listen, I'm sure that when this video is getting published, there's a giant kerfuffle happening on Twitter right now, but I just don't have the mental or emotional bandwidth right now to try to untangle the car crash that I just witnessed between these two. Every line of hostility just back and forth while I'm sitting there going, this fight is ridiculous to me. You do not need to be getting loud like this. All of this is unnecessary. Just let it go. One of the most frustrating parts of this was right at the beginning when Sue was saying, why haven't you come to see me? And Emily points out that Sue was mad at her, and Sue was saying, I am mad at you. That's why you should have come to see me. Okay, 2 things with that. Number 1, it is a realistic way of presenting conflict between 2 people. Different communication styles and an inability to recognize the different communication styles can very often be what leads to these types of scuffles between people. Number 2, please don't stress out the people in your life by trying to force them to resolve conflict the exact same way as you. It is perfectly valid to take time away, to cool off, collect yourself, gather your thoughts before you reconvene to try to work out a disagreement. Also, when Sue said, you've barely had time for my baby since you're always writing your goddamn poems, this is a mess. It's a nightmare. I don't want to be here anymore. Please feel free to vent your feelings in the comments so I know I'm not alone in being entirely exasperated with this back and forth. It's not like I universally sided with one party in the fight either. I just didn't want to sit through the fight happening in the first place. It's already going downhill, right? Step away. Go back to your houses and cool off until you can speak to each other without doing all of that. Please, for the sake of my blood pressure. Before we get into the main bulk of what's left in this episode, let's briefly touch on Austin because I don't actually have too much I need to unpack. The first part is, I do still really feel an emotional connection to Austin's motivations because everything he's doing here, the draft dodging, is because he wants to be with his child. You don't need to be rooting for Austin to have a romance with Sue. That's never been the intended takeaway of what his story is. It's about Austin getting to be a loving father. What I also appreciate, though, is that line which is included about his ability to draft dodge in the first place, which is, rich people can do whatever they want. It's the first rule of the United States. Yes. Call it out. There are far too many examples of this to list in this video, especially since I've already gone on a big tangential rant, but it's insufferably true. Jeff Bezos is evil and so is Mark Zuckerberg. Give indigenous Hawaiians their land back, you parasitic villains. Okay, now jumping back over to Emily and Lavinia. I want to check in with the audience about what it is that you think Hailee's favorite scene was. Like I've said before, I tried to count, and doing so was kind of a mess, but I'm inclined to think that it was something near the end of the episode where she's talking with Lavinia. Emily is finally able to come out to someone besides Sue, of course, and to receive that acceptance, and for Lavinia to encourage her to just be with the woman she loves. Something in that part of the story is what I'm guessing Hailee was talking about, but let me know your theories. Let's go back, though, to the beginning of all of this. Was anyone else getting Bill and Ted vibes when the gazebo started lighting up to take them traveling through time? How old is Elena Smith? Is she Gen X or is she a millennial? Either way, that was the vibe I was getting, and I was here for it. I love the connecting lines of Emily first saying, "Sometimes I feel like I was born in the wrong century," and then later on saying, "I would rather go to the future when the war is over." Also, Sylvia Plath saying, "The future never comes for women." It was all just a very insightful way of looking at the entire idea of time and the evolution of social and cultural norms. On the one hand, you can see how comparatively nice Sylvia Plath's world is relative to Emily and Lavinia's world. Women can go to university by then. But at the same time, we as the audience can see how Sylvia Plath's world wasn't all that great either because of those horrific treatments she received for her mental health struggles. Also, before I leave this talking point, I want to point out that when Emily said, "I would rather go to the future when the war is over," I immediately snapped back. The war never ends, actually, because of something called the military-industrial complex. I loved getting to see Emily and Lavinia travel to the future, though, because we get to see Emily being validated as a poet, as a creative, as an artist. One of my biggest gripes with certain conflicts that keep popping up this season is that you cannot go around getting me invested in Emily and her journey and expect me to be okay with anyone saying anything that even remotely disrespects her creativity. Stop killing her creative vibe. That's why I love that we can see Emily finding out her poems have been published in the future and people can get their own copy to read what she has written and be inspired by it to create their own art. I also love that we can see how Emily is so supported by Lavinia. When Lavinia reveals that she did not burn all of Emily's poems, she put them out into the world for people to appreciate her art. That is beautiful. It's also a cute comedic moment that Emily and Lavinia don't know what the word lesbian means because they just didn't use that word in their time. Lavinia was so funny when she mixed it up with the word Lebanese. That was the implied punchline of that anyway. Also, I don't have too much I want to get into about Sylvia Plath's dialogue or references, except for one. When she dragged Lee Strasberg, I screamed. That is such an actory New York thing to call out, by the way. If you don't know, the Strasberg method is another name for method acting, since he was one of the pioneers of that. I say one of because if you're going to talk about method acting, you have to also talk about Stanislavski, Stella Adler, Sanford Meisner, and absolutely none of you clicked on this video to hear about any of that. Emily and Lavinia's heart-to-hearts in this episode are some of my favorite exchanges they've ever had. It's really sweet to find a way to put a coming out moment that ends in nothing but warmth and acceptance among characters in the 1800s. That is the type of love and support I want to see more of, not just in the show, but in the world. It also goes to show that Emily and Sue, for whatever reason, are stuck in this ridiculous mess and don't have the ability to take a step back and be objective, so it takes an outside source of wisdom to put everything into perspective. Lavinia is the one who tells Emily that she herself would be so happy if she had someone to love and would run into their arms and never let go. And that other lovely line of how real love doesn't exist in your imagination, it exists right here in this abjectly horrible place we call reality. I wouldn't consider myself to be the most romantic person, but I am fair. I'm sorry, I have House of Gucci running through my veins right now. I can't help it. Go see House of Gucci by the time this review goes up. I will have seen it a second time. You know what? I need to plan another showing. I've planned a couple, but I deserve happiness. And my love language is seeing House of Gucci on the big screen in one of those comfortable reclining seats. Yeah. What was I talking about? Dickinson. That really only leaves the final revelation. What is there to say? Emily saw the future after all. Hopefully this video made even a drop of sense. I think my brain has melted at this point from cranking out 4 video review scripts back to back and hurrying to film, edit, and upload them so they're all scheduled and ready to go for you, the audience. Please like, comment, and subscribe to support my work on here, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!